Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Start of part 2 of chapter 21. In the spring of 683, about the middle of 63 Hijri, Uqba started his return journey with his army. It was an army of Arabs and Berbers. The Berbers included Qusayla the chief. We do not know what route was taken by Uqba from the Maghrib, but he did not go via Tangier as there is no record of any further meeting with Count Julian, the wily governor of the province. Except for avoiding Tangier, he probably took the same route back. He faced no problem on the way as he left the far Maghrib, passed through the near Maghrib, and re-entered Africa in the region which is now the northeastern part of Algeria. Nobody opposed his march. Some tribes were friendly, some indifferent, many were positively unfriendly, but they avoided confronting him and watched in brooding silence as he passed. To Uqba their dimly concealed hostility was not apparent, since he himself was pure-hearted and incapable of deceit or duplicity of any kind. He judged others by the same standards, and could not tell an enemy until he stood up waving a hostile flag. The army made a long halt at Tubna, near the present Biskra. The war was over. Everybody relaxed. The atmosphere was one of peace and satisfaction at a great job superbly done, of a nice tiredness. Most of the soldiers wanted to go home, to relax and enjoy the fruits of their victory. They had missed their families and dear ones for 2 years and wished to get back to them. They had marched 3,000 miles to the Atlantic and back in 18 months, had fought scores of battles against the fiercest enemies and made them bite the dust. Now they wanted to hang up their weapons and rest their weary limbs. Uqba let them go. They dispersed from Tubna, the bulk of the army going to Kairouan, while some Berber clans returned to their tribal areas in the eastern part of the Maghrib. Uqba failed to notice that it was mainly the Arabs who were going away, not so much the Berbers. Soon only a handful of loyal Arabs were left with him, 300 in all. Beside them were camped thousands of Berbers from the tribes of Buranis under their chief Qusayla bin Lamzan. The day of reckoning was fast approaching, but Uqba still did not see the danger. Abu Muhajir Dinar saw it very clearly. The disloyalty of Qusayla, his readiness to respond to Roman overtures to turn against the Muslims, his overwhelming strength compared with the small force left with Uqba, formed a clear pattern in Abu Muhajir's mind. Then some dispute came up which led to a confrontation between the Arabs and the Berbers. What this was we do not know. Perhaps it was an incident engineered by Qusayla to test Uqba's reactions, and it had the effect of bringing matters in the open. Now there was no pretense. Abu Muhajir warned Uqba about the intentions of Qusayla. He added, "Hasten against him before his position gets stronger." It took Uqba only a few minutes to throw his small force into battle formation in front of the Berber camp. He himself stood ahead of his men, with his hand at the hilt of his sword, facing Qusayla. Beside him stood Abu Muhajir, still in fetters. Qusayla was a brave and redoubtable chief, but he hesitated. There was something about uqbabinnafe. Qusayla knew that Uqba played with death as joyfully as a child plays with a favorite toy. Qusayla dropped his gaze and turned away. He left what could have been a battlefield, followed by his furiously indignant tribe. "Why did you turn away from him?" his officers demanded angrily. "He has only 5,000 men, while we are 50,000. His comrades have gone from him and there is no one to help him." Either the Berber officers were exaggerating the strength of the two forces or historians made an error in recording the figures. Neither could Uqba have had 5,000 men, nor could the Berbers have numbered 50,000. If Uqba had commanded 5,000 men here, he would have thrashed any number of Qusaylas, and 50,000 soldiers just could not come into one camp, nor be deployed in one action against a compact front formed by 5,000 defenders. The Muslims were actually 300, and just a few more. The Berbers numbered several thousands at the moment, probably not more than 5,000 men. Uqba at once struck camp and marched to Tahuza, a little to the east of Biskra. This was a flourishing town with a large Roman population, but the Romans had heard of the dispersal of the Muslim army, and as Uqba appeared in sight, they saw that there was little more than a small regiment of cavalry with him. They closed the gates of the town of Tahuza. Uqba appeared near the wall with his small faithful band. The Romans on the wall hurled stones at him, and then fired arrows. He spoke of Allah and Muhammad and called them to Islam. They abused him. Uqba pulled back from the fort. He moved a few miles to the south and pitched camp in the open near the south-western foothills of the Taurus Mountains. This was his last move. Meanwhile, Kusala had been in touch with Roman elements. Many Romans joined him. In discussions with them and with the elders of his own tribe, he agreed to seize the initiative and not let the Muslims get away. A plan was made. His army, which was mainly a Berber army with a few Roman detachments, would march to Tahuza and fall upon Uqba, where he was camped with his 300 veterans. The fact that Tahuza was in the center of the tribal region of the Buranis, Kusala's tribal group, facilitated his plans. The Berbers moved like a vast horde on a semicircular front, looking from a distance like a swarm of locusts. Kusala had at last come out in his true colors. He was out to wreak vengeance, and the fact that his intended victim had been his commander and comrade in arms over nearly 2 years of hard, victorious campaigning made no difference to the Berber chief. He had waited for the moment when Uqba would be weak and vulnerable, and that moment had now come. At a measured pace he led his army towards the Muslims. The Arabs stood defiantly to face the oncoming Holocaust. They were mainly companions and sons of companions, and others close to them. 300 devout Muslims. There was something starkly beautiful in this situation, in the spirit of the Muslims awaiting death, in the inflexible determination of their leader to win in the right cause or die the death of a martyr, in the treachery of his opponents, in the events as they unfolded. Uqba and his men had faced death in 100 battles and earned great merit with Allah. Having beaten the Berbers into submission and established the superiority of the Muslim Arab in war, they were not about to bend the knee before the same Berber. One side of the battlefield was open, and the Muslims could have retreated in haste to join their comrades in caravan, and then come back to fight Kusayla again. In fact, this course would have been better for Uqba and for Islam in Africa, but it was not the way of uqbabinnafe. He offered 2 rakats of prayer. Beside him stood Abu Muhajir Dinar. He had behaved badly with Uqba when becoming governor a dozen years ago, but since then, after his own fall from rank and position, he had proved a good man and a good Muslim. He had fought bravely beside Uqba for 2 years, given his commander sound advice in matters of war and peace, and earned no less merit as a holy warrior. Although his feet were still in fetters, he had no regrets, no tears to shed. The spectre of certain death cleansed the hearts of the two men of all vindictiveness and resentment and grievance. They were about to face their Lord. The certainty of a violent and bloody end purified their spirit and revealed two very noble natures. Uqba did not wish Abu Muhajir to stay with him and die. did not wish him to even suffer any more. He ordered that the fetters be removed. "Go and join the Muslims," he said to his erstwhile prisoner. "Take command of them. I seek martyrdom." "And I, by Allah, seek it with you," replied Abu Muhajir. Again Uqba tried to get the fetters removed. Again Abu Muhajir refused, saying, "It is Allah who has thrown me in irons." The two embraced each other for the last time. Then they drew their swords and broke their scabbards, and upon Uqba's command, his men also broke their scabbards and dismounted from their horses to fight on foot, a double gesture of defiance and acceptance of death. The Berbers hurled themselves at the compact body of the faithful. Those in the front recoiled from the ferocious tenacity of the Muslim defense. The best of the tribesmen fell in combat under a Muslim sword, lance, or dagger. They came again, pressed on. Those who fell were replaced by others as eager for blood. The Muslims knew that this was the end, but they were determined to send many infidels to hell before their own end came. They fought like wild animals at bay, tearing the Berber companies to pieces as they came on. There was no weakening, no flagging of spirit. In the din and dust of this savage clash at Tahuza was enacted the last glorious scene in the beautiful drama of Uqba's conquest of the Maghrib. The ranks of the faithful began to thin. Most of them fell as the attacks of the Berbers continued. There were none left who were not wounded. More fell as martyrs. Then none remained but Uqba and Abu Muhajir, their swords and armor dripping with blood. The heaps of slain Berbers lying around them bore witness to their valor and prowess. The Berbers came on. Uqba and Muhajir were the last to fall. They lay side by side. They died as brothers in Islam, having forgiven each other and hoping for forgiveness for themselves. They joyfully drank the cup of martyrdom which both had eagerly sought. This happened in the late summer or early autumn of 683, early part of 63 Hijri. The place where Uqba fell and was buried is now known as Sidi Uqba. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had spoken about Tahuza in his lifetime. He had said, "In the future men from my following will be killed there, fighting in the way of Allah. Their merit will be like the merit of the people of Badr. They will not change. They will come to the day of judgment with their swords upon their shoulders." Muslim scholars believe that this prophecy related to Uqba and his men. Perhaps Uqba had heard of the prophecy. Perhaps this was the reason for his not seeking safety in flight. He was about 60 when he died, having been born in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but after the migration. This is how Uqba had wished to die, a glorious and gory end to a life spent fighting in the way of Allah. He was one of the noblest of the Muslims, brave and virtuous, with an inflexible dedication to the cause of Islam. He was a brilliant general on the battlefield, an inspiring leader whose followers preferred death beside him to life without him. He was too good-hearted and pure to understand the machinations of his foxy Berber allies, too direct in seeking battle with the infidel to use principles of strategy which would have got him his conquest with less sweat and blood. He was incapable of fear or falsehood. If he was tricked by others, it was because of the purity of his character and his trusting nature. Those very Berbers and Romans who eventually cornered him and killed him when he was vulnerable held him in reverence even after his death. May Allah be pleased with uqbabinnafe. There was alarm and despondency in Caravan. The two men left in charge of the place, Zuhair bin Qais al-Balawi and Umar bin Ali, were brave officers and devout Muslims, but after the tragedy of Tahuza, it was not easy to keep up the military enthusiasm of the people. There were troops present to defend Caravan, and had they been put to the test of battle they would no doubt have given a good account of themselves. But the inspiring presence of Uqba was gone and spirits sagged. Exaggerated reports of Berber strength and ferocity added to the confusion. Moreover, not all had been killed at Tahuza. A few soldiers, wounded and unable to fight on, had been taken prisoner. A few days later, they were ransomed by the Muslim governor of Tafsa and returned to join their comrades in Caravan. These fellows also spread exaggerated reports of enemy capabilities, as prisoners or those who have lost in battle are wont to do. Kusayla was seen as a monster, a fierce and unforgiving killer. This was patently unfair because all those who died at Tahuza fell fighting and the prisoners taken were allowed their freedom on payment of ransom. But the tide of destiny was turning. There was widespread anxiety in Caravan. Then came news that Kusayla the Berber was coming. Zuhair bin Qas called a congregation of the Muslims and addressed them. O Muslims, your comrades have gone to paradise, and Allah has blessed them with martyrdom. Follow in their footsteps. Allah will give you more victories. There was silence in the crowd, a lack of response. It appeared that not many shared Zuhair's courage and confidence. In fact, there was a definite depression and a lack of enthusiasm to fight the Berbers, whose numbers had been vastly magnified by rumor. The mood of the populace was put into words by a man who was determined not to fight. This was a fellow named Hansh bin Abdullah as-Sanani. No, by Allah, he shouted to Zuhair, we do not accept your proposal, and you have no authority to give us orders. No action would be better for the Muslims than to save themselves from this calamity by going east. Then he turned to address the crowd. O Muslims, whoever from amongst you will return to the east, follow me. The fellow marched out at Caravan and all the soldiers followed him, despite the exhortations of Zubair bin Qais. Zuhair found that there was none left of the military community in Caravan except himself and his family. He had no choice but to follow in the footsteps of his soldiers, and he too left Caravan and caught up with them. They marched all the way to Barqa where they stopped and established themselves as a frontier garrison. This evacuation took place in the very end of 63 Hijri. The Muslims were again out of Africa. They were back at Barqa, back to square one. In Muharram 64 Hijri, August 683, Kusayla marched into Caravan at the head of an army of Berbers and Romans. Large numbers of Muslims had left the city at his approach, but many were still there. These people, however, understood the futility of opposing his advance and wisely offered no resistance. Kusayla knew that the Muslims were there, and contrary to what people feared, he gave them a guarantee of peace and safety. There was no looting, no pillage, no harassment of any kind. The sun of Kusayla's fortune was at its zenith. He was master of all Africa with the exception of Libya. He was for all purposes King Kusayla the Berber, ruling over Berbers and Romans and Muslims, the latter being both Arab and Berber. So far as we know, he proved a good ruler during the 5 years of life that remained to him. But the tide of destiny would turn again and the sword of vengeance would flash in the African sun. His account would be settled. End of part 2 of chapter 21.